How to grow glutes as a runner. Today we are going to be talking about the elusive question that plagues runners and endurance junkies everywhere, and that's, can you grow your glutes, get that big juicy booty or strong powerful glutes that you want for sport and performance while also doing running or endurance training? Now, I am definitely very pro grow the booty if you would like to, and or also using a lot of movements that can support our running training at the same time with my own clients and in my programming, the LIST method. It isn't impossible to grow your glutes while also running, but we're often short on time, we need efficient training, and we need something that allows us to support our running and endurance training goals while also supporting the booty gains or booty strength that we are looking for. First things first, if you're excited about this video, you love my channel, you want to learn more, be sure to hit that subscribe button before we dive in today. Hit that like button, leave me a comment if you found this helpful or something else you would like to learn in a future video, but let's dive in. The first thing you need to do is making sure that you're eating enough. All the exercises I'm going to show you today will not magically grow your glutes without adequate protein, carbs, and calories to support your overall needs for developing and growing muscle tissue. For that reason, I recommend if you're someone who does have a lot of glute growth potential, or you feel like it's a big jump of muscle mass that you need to gain to get your glutes or your booty where you want it to be, you might want to move this to an off-season goal or spend a specific or significant period of time training for strength season or an off-season goal. Now, I have a podcast episode on this over on the Messy Middle where the video failed, so we don't have it over here on YouTube, but I would encourage you to go over there and learn about the importance of strength seasons. With that being said, you can also train your glutes year-round, even when you're running or endurance training, and that doesn't mean you have to stop or only do that in the off-season. One of my favorite things to say for runners and endurance lovers is to do a little bit of hypertrophy all the time. That's often how we gain or maintain muscle alongside our running and endurance goals. But of course, I have to give you the disclaimer of you need to eat enough, and you need to spend a significant period of time eating enough and training hard enough so that you can also support your glute gains. And that might not be the best time to be pursuing that goal. Well, maybe you're training for a very big training or event, something like a marathon or an ultra marathon, or your first very long distance thing where you're having a hard time just balancing and recovering the fatigue and demand of the two new things that you're doing in your training program at once. But that doesn't mean you have to wait till then to train your glutes. And the movements and exercises I'm going to walk you through today are accessory moves that I actually love for runners or endurance lovers or junkies, or even my hiking friends, that can support your glute gains, your lower body gains and strength, and your running performance as well. Now, first things first, when we're thinking about growing our glutes or any muscle for that matter, we want to think about moving through a full range of motion in most of the moves that we're using to stress and stimulate that muscle tissue, while also having adequate load on the bar or mechanical tension, which is going to be the main driver of muscle growth. And then the next component we want to think about is volume. How many total reps and sets at a heavy enough weight are you doing each week? And so when we're thinking about our exercise selection for growing our glutes, but also then potentially complementing our running training, we want to think about things that are going to train and stimulate our lower body, specifically our glutes, in a full range of motion, done at a 7, 8, or 9 RPE or out of 10 effort, leaving maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 reps in the tank at most. So you're getting enough weight on the bar, you're going to move that muscle through its full range of motion, and it's going to be heavy enough that when you do it for enough sets per week, your muscle grows, by bringing also in the proteins and energy it needs from the nutrition you're bringing in to stimulate and grow more muscle tissue. For that reason, we really want to focus on the bread and butter movements for so many things, which are our compound movements. These are the most bang for your buck. They allow you to load the most weight, and they allow you to get the most out of them, while also complementing your overall strength training goals and things like that. Over the years, a lot of people have moved away from the idea that a squat is going to develop your glutes, and we favored things more like the hip thrust, and I will explain in a second why I'm not as much of a fan of the hip thrust, but we really want to think about those full range of motion, squatting and hinging patterns specifically. So when we're thinking about full range of motion with just barbell-based movements, some of my favorite variations are going to be things like back squat, reverse lunges, split squats, and or RDLs. So let's walk through those right now. So first things first, we have your classic back squat. Now your back squat or your full body weight squat is going to be taking a loaded bar where you can put a ton of weight on a barbell, more than you maybe can with dumbbells, but you can also do this as a goblet squat or things like that. And moving for that full range of motion, you're getting that full stretch of the glute down there at the bottom of your squat. Now, athletes who squat and squat heavy and squat often typically tend to have some pretty nice glutes. That doesn't mean the accessory works we show you won't help round it out or bring the full glute together, but I really am a big fan of heavy squatting, or heavy relative to you and what you can do when we're thinking about growing the booty or the glutes or the gains. So we got your classic back squat. Now the next thing I love are going to be reverse lunges or split squats. And these don't need to be done just with a barbell, but for many people, holding the weight in your hands at the side or on your shoulders at some point in time might be limited how much weight you're able to do. So you're absolutely fine to do all these barbell variations with dumbbells or kettlebells, but if you need to add more weight or do heavy weight, you might need to be moving to something like a barbell to distribute or increase that load more evenly. Variations of lunges, squats, or step-ups, which I'll cover in a little bit later in the video here, are going to be some of the bread and butter key components of what I think work really, really well for growing our glutes, putting them through that full range of motion, and adding adequate load to them so they can stimulate that growth, which we want. The biggest thing that many people tend to do, especially runners who are thinking about glute strength, is they do a ton of underloaded banded stuff or underloaded high rep, kind of half range of motion things. And we really want to think about loading in a controlled manner through that full range of motion and thinking of those squat dominant patterns as the first half of that equation of what we are looking for. Before we move on to some dumbbell and accessory variations that also work this as well, I want to show you the RDL, which I think is a really helpful movement to also be growing the glutes through that full range of motion and working from that hinging pattern and not just the squat pattern. Now again, the RDL can be done with dumbbells. It doesn't have to be done just with a barbell, but you're able to do more load and add more tension through that full range of motion and doing more weight with that movement as well with a barbell most often, but you can also do this with heavy dumbbells as well. There's nothing wrong with doing everything I'm showing you here today with dumbbells if that's what you have. So the RDL is great is because you're going to work those glutes in a stretched range of motion, going through that full range of motion. You got that nice glute and hamstring stretch there in the back of your booty, back of your body. So when you're doing this movement, you really want to think about that hinging pattern and keeping that tension in your glutes. This will also help with hamstring development as well. A lot of these compound moves are usually using your quads and your glutes, or your hamstrings and your glutes kind of simultaneously or together in order to develop this for you. So you want to think about having that tension on your glutes as you're extending forward, kind of taking the booty to shut the door kind of thing is what a lot of people say. So you're shutting the door as you're going back. But you should feel that tension through your glutes and also in your hamstrings as well. And I like the RDL over your conventional deadlift because often with the deadlift, while that does help kind of train a multitude of muscles across the body, this starts to isolate out and increase that tension right there on the glutes a little bit more specifically. Now the next thing I love are going to be a variety of step-up variations. So if you guys go back, I have an older video showing you different step-up variations that I love for running or hiking training, but we're gonna go over a few more today that I love specifically to complement your running, hiking, outdoor endurance activities, but also your glutes as well. So the step-up itself is a really, really incredible exercise and a variety of, different movement patterns of which you can do it with, because it's great for getting that glute, again, through that full range of motion and really driving up with that glute. It is going to develop and use your quads as well, but it's also going to really train that glute strength moving up, especially if you don't kick off when you're coming through these. And step-ups are great as well as lunge variations because you can kind of train your glutes in multiple planes of motion. So you can train them going forward and to the side. The reason that we want to train our glutes in multiple planes of motion or multiple ways, because it allows us to target both the gluteus maximus, that big, huge, strong muscle that we think of with our glutes, but also of our glute medius right here that kind of gives that shelf-like feature that a lot of people are wanting or trying to train for. Now, all of my exercises and demonstrations today are barbell or dumbbell based because I'm a very minimal equipment based coach. I have a home gym as well. So people will target these things with cables and machines as well, and that can work fine and dandy. But I think a heavy loaded movement itself is usually going to stimulate growth for these muscles a lot more. But yes, you can sprinkle in some of that tiny baby isolation as well to kind of round it out or put the cherry on top with your training. So first, the classic step-up variation that we all know and love is your traditional regular step-up. Now you can do this with a barbell like I have here behind me or dumbbells, but it's as simple as going up on the box, stepping. You can kind of step at a 90-degree range of motion. this is a little bit high for me. I am short. If you're in the same situation, you can just put a plate underneath you so you kind of have increased distance between you and the box or bench that you're using. But it's just stepping up with your foot in front of you, kind of leaning forward and keeping that weight on that foot. And you don't want to kick off or pop off with that back leg. You just want to kind of drive through your heel, and you'll feel that tension in your glute as you step up and move your body weight upward on your movement. So again, you can do this with a barbell or dumbbells. When we're working on our traditional step up, what we can do over time is increase that range of motion of the step up. And this is a great way to increase that glute stretch, and it's kind of more of an advanced movement for stronger athletes and trainees, but can be something that you can work towards. Now, this is quite the range of motion for me. I am very petite, but this could be something that you're working up to over time with increasing the box height, or whatever that looks like for you and your gym and how you are training. And what you can see is I went from like slightly above a 90-degree angle to this now being even higher and really putting my glute to that full range of motion. And I'm having to work, again, increasing that. You're gonna probably use less weight because it's a higher range of motion, but then you're going to load the glute up through that as well. There's nothing wrong with doing lower box variations of this or higher ones, or mixing them through at different points in time in your training. They're just two different ways to do kind of the same thing, but I love the high box step up for those booty and glute gains and getting my glutes strong as well, and that's helped me with a lot of my injuries and underlying weaknesses that I have coming off of a fall I had in race, specifically with my troublesome glute I have here on the left. So I've learned to really love these as part of my training and one of my in rotation step up variations that I love to keep around. Next, we have the crossover step up and the side step up. So the crossover step up has become one of my favorite step up variations. I love it because it's stretching that glute through a different plane of motion. It's using a lot of that glute med, and you're kind of having to cross over and shift that weight in this direction, rather this direction, to move the weight and step up and come over. A less difficult but similar variation to this is just the side step up or the side step down. So this can be as simple as you're just stepping up here on the side and you're stepping up kind of in this side plane of motion rather than moving your weight forward. Or you're using the step downs to do a slow eccentric and control that on the way down on the descent, like this. 1, 2, 3, up. 1, 2, 3. I love those, and keep in mind that for this and the cross step over and any step of variation, you can always move to a lower box or a lower bench based off your skill level. You don't have to start at these high boxes, and if this is too high for you, again, if you're short like me, you can put a plate on the floor so you're increasing the height of what you're starting from, or you can simply find a smaller box or smaller bench to start from and work up from there. Next is going to be your classic single leg RDL. I love a single leg RDL for my runners. I think it works great on kind of building stability from your big toe and your foot all the way up your leg, kind of training you to maintain your body weight over that leg, often something that we see in running. And while I don't think that our lifting has to look just like our running to benefit us, all lifting will benefit you if you're a runner. I like some of these moves as ways to kind of train these smaller components of things that we often struggle with, or potentially can help us become a little bit more resilient. I don't like to say injury prone or injury free because that happens to everyone, including me, but can help make us a little bit stronger going into this. And I think the single leg RDL is just a fantastic accessory move all around, and potentially one of my favorite glute accessory moves. So much that of the barbell RDL, it's gonna work your glute and your hamstrings more, where the step ups are working your quads and your glutes. And with this, you are going to grab the kettlebell or dumbbell. You can either do it where it's on the side opposite of your leg or the same side. Sometimes it's easier for people to balance by keeping it on that opposite side, but there's benefits to that. Or you can even do both if you need to lift heavy enough. You can lift 2 dumbbells or 2 kettlebells at the same time. And so simply you're going to balance on that single foot, lift up your other leg, slowly lower to the floor or mid shin, and come back up. Now, one of the most common mistakes I see a lot of runners do is they underload their RDLs, especially their single leg RDLs. And this is something that I have fallen victim to in the past. And so I'm using a lightweight for demonstration in all these videos simply because it makes it easier for me. But don't be afraid to increase your reps and your load on those. Lift heavier, especially if you have a deadlift that's very heavy, 150, 200, 250, 300 pounds, you're gonna need more than just that 35 pounds in order to train that. But if you're somebody who struggles with lifting heavy in that because you don't have the stability component yet, what you can do instead is regress it to a B stance or a foot wall mountain stance RDL to kind of still stimulate and train the glute and the hamstring, but reduce that stability component, and that looks like this. So we have that B stance RDL, or the foot-mounted wall RDL. Now, some people actually say they actually feel their glutes more when they do the foot-mounted one, or a bench-supported one, or a B-stance one, and you can play around with these if you want to kind of target your glutes a little bit more. When it's more stable, you're going to be able to do more weight, which will load your glute and hamstrings a little bit more, which might be a little bit more beneficial for hypertrophy and strength. But I do encourage you to work towards doing it on a unsupported version as well, because it again is great for that stability up through your foot, up to your hip, and using your glutes, which also kind of translates slightly over into that landing stance of which we are doing in training in our running and or endurance pursuits. Now the next things are going to be lunge variations. We already did a reverse lunge and even the split squat with the barbell, but lunges and or Cossack squats and or split squat variations as well are also great for that glute development. Of course, they're going to have some components of quad and they're not fully isolating that glute, but again, they're training those glutes through multiple planes of motion, but also full ranges of motions. So we already showed you the reverse lunge, but something I also like is the lateral lunge. Now I see a lot of runners kind of butcher this with people doing these like half range of motion versions of this. I'd rather you work through a regression or a supported version of those lunges instead of doing that if you need to get through the full range of motion and get you comfortable moving your whole body weight if you aren't able to move dumbbells or weight at this time. So simply, a lateral lunge is stepping out to the side here, stepping downward, and coming back up. Same thing on the other side. You also have curtsy lunges, so you're going backwards and you're crossing your leg diagonally behind you. That's a great glute stretch there. And those are some of the variations as well as the reverse lunge that I prefer a little bit because they are training your glutes a tad bit more or getting you to moving in a different plane of motion than your traditional moving forward that we tend to do in most movements in the gym. Next, we have our split squat, and I know everybody hates the split squat, but I wanna talk about how you can make the split squat slightly more glute favorable rather than quad favorable if that's something that you're trying to grow or gain in the gym. So one of my favorite tricks for setting up your split squat is going down, stepping your foot out at this angle, and then stepping up. But if you're wanting to focus more on your quads during these split squats, staying more vertical like this will put a little bit more of that force through your quads. But if you want a little bit more glutes, you can lean forward a little bit more. And you'll feel that there and that glute just a tad more. Now, do I think the variation between leaning forward versus back makes that big of a difference? Probably not when we're thinking about just doing enough load and loading it heavy enough, but it can be a slight tweak that you can do to kind of use your glutes a tad more in those movements. Now, we have my most unpopular opinion when it comes to glute gains, and that's I don't love the hip thrust. I think the hip thrust is clunky, it's time consuming to set up, you have to get out a ton of plates, it takes a lot of time out of your gym sessions, it's not really fun to do in my opinion, and that doesn't mean if you like to do it that it doesn't have a place in your training. If you want to do hip thrust, I think that you should place them kind of as an extra cushion of what you're trying to do on top of the full range of motion squat, lunge, step up, and hinge patterns that we were talking about here. The hip thrust is a partial range of motion movement, and it's training mostly that top end of that range of motion, and you can load it heavy, but you're also not getting that full range of motion that you're wanting in order to grow your glutes. So I think it's a great way to fill in a little bit extra volume, fill in the gaps, kind of sprinkle in a little bit more, but I don't think it should be your bread and butter and main or only exercise that we're using to grow glutes. Now, with that being said, I also don't like it because it's time consuming, and I know for many runners or people who are trying to balance hybrid training goals, having to do so many things with running and lifting already takes up a lot of time, and we want to get in and out of the gym quick. And so for runners or endurance lovers, outdoors enthusiasts, what I actually like instead is the single leg glute bridge, because this thing is a killer. I think this is worse than split squats, but these have been incredibly helpful for me when it comes to my own glute strength and development for my running and or just becoming well-rounded in my strength in the gym, recovering from my own glute weakness injury, but also something that I know I struggle with, so I should probably be doing, usually indication that you need to be doing more of it. And so I like these because you can kind of load them heavy. You're isolating that glute and leg at a time, making it kind of more challenging, with an easier ability to load it with just heavy dumbbells, and or some people use a landmine setup, which I think is great too, but we're not gonna show that variation here today. So for the single leg glute bridge, you're getting there on your back. You wanna kind of have that 90-degree tabletop angle. You can put the weight right there on the leg of what you're using, lift up that other leg, go through that full range of motion as much as you can, and then up. Now, all of these movements for the lower body are also some of my favorite training accessories in general for runners, which is why I'm bringing them up here today, because I think that while they complement your running really well, and I love them as running accessory moves, they also open the opportunity for us to grow our glutes or get those booty gains alongside our endurance training pursuit and goals. A lot of the List Method clients always joke, I came to start hybrid or race training and I crossed the finish line, but also my butt was a lot bigger, look at this photo, joking that they got the booty gains while they also pursuing these other things. And that's because within my programming and my approach to training, we do a lot of heavy barbell compound lifting, but we also do a ton of step-ups and lunges and RDL variations alongside other things that complement running, like plyometrics, calf work, and other things like that. And so these movements aren't necessarily unique to just growing your glutes or unique to just runners growing their glutes, but they also cross over as moves that I love for runners in general, for the lower body, or any person who's really trying to get those booty gains, even if you don't run. Some things to consider when you're programming and doing these yourself in your training. As you can see there in a lot of those movements, I kept the movement controlled and steady. You want to think about having a controlled, steady tempo when you're doing these things. And that looks like simply not just falling down to the bottom of your step up or plopping down to the bottom of your squat, really moving on like a 1, 2, or 3 second count down to the bottom, pausing or exploding back up on that concentric, but not making it where you're kind of flopping around like a fish. You want to be intentional and move slowly, and or you can manipulate or play with tempo in your training as a variable to add more tension to your glutes. 1 to 3 seconds is probably all you need for those reps and sets, but even things like those single leg hip thrust, it is a killer if you do a 3-second eccentric and a 1-second pause at the top, and that is also something you can do with step-ups or split squats or any of those things as well in your training. You wanna think about training these in rep ranges between 6 to probably 12 reps. I think that's a good window of training. I think I really love for runners doing a lot of 6 to 8 reps. I think that's a great opportunity to load things a little bit heavier and also get in the stimulus and tension that we want without doing so much volume that it leaves you fatigued. Remember, we don't need our lifting to look like running for it to benefit us, but also from a hypertrophy standpoint, it benefits you to also spend some time, and that may be more traditional 8 to 12 range as well. So I like programming for clients periods of time where you're doing lower reps and sets, so maybe 3 sets of 6 to 8, and then periods of time you're doing potentially higher reps within your sets. So 3 sets or 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12, kind of working through that. I don't personally love programming things 15 to 20 reps, usually because at that point in time, you are probably not loading heavy enough, or you can get it loaded heavier and get enough reps and sets in that kind of window of 6 to 12. You can go above 2 if you're training at home. You can check out my How to Make At-Home Training Harder video if you need help adjusting for that if you're only training with dumbbells at home. And the last thing is sets per week. I think starting out with, you have your quad and glute dominant sets, and then you have your hamstring and glute dominant sets. And those are things that we can start thinking about training as 2 buckets, kind of your hinging and your squatting, or your step up lunges, squats are kind of all in that pattern. And thinking about starting with maybe 6 sets of each of those per week, spread over 2 to 3 days. And then you can increase to maybe 10 sets total, 12 sets total. And you're getting a lot of crossover glute training with both of those, both your hinging and your squatting patterns. And then from there, if you're someone who has a hard time growing your glutes, you're eating enough, you're crushing in the gym, filling and sprinkling in the rest of that volume with things like your barbell hip thrust, or maybe, I don't really love the kickbacks, but some of the equipment I don't have here today are things like glute ham raises or reverse hypers. And I think those are great for stimulating that full range of motion glute strength, but also in a way that you can load it heavy enough and kind of get a little bit extra bang for your buck within your training. Last things last, with all things muscle gaining, it's slow and it's a long process. And for many of you, if you focus on lifting heavy, training like an athlete, eating enough, and recovering, over time, these things will come, but we have to be really intentional to get muscle growth. Usually your quads, your hamstrings, your lower body are also gonna grow within this, and there's nothing wrong with isolating out the glutes a little bit more if you need them. But also keeping in mind that we wanna be well-rounded athletes, and a lot of the movements I showed you here today and things that we worked through today are things that are gonna allow you to do that. So if you found this video helpful, go ahead and leave me a comment on something that you learned, or your favorite lower body lift as a runner, or for growing your glutes gains. Why can I not say grow glutes gains? Grow glutes gains, that's a tongue twister. Here in the comments, like, subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one.